Have you been looking for a Taekwondo podcast with qualified people who know what they're talking about, who help you keep up with everything going on in the Taekwondo world? Well, you found it. This is the Taekwondo Podcast. Taekwondo news, competitions and other events, training and sports science, keeping the fans, coaches, and high-performance athletes up to date with the latest news and trends on Olympic Taekwondo. Let's do this. This is the Taekwondo Podcast. And now your hosts, Coach César Valentim and Peter Nessler.
Hello and welcome to the Taekwondo Podcast. We're a podcast based out of Austria in English language for everyone out there who likes Taekwondo. In this episode, we talk with Coach Juan Moreno, Olympic coach, head trainer for the Brazilian national team. Welcome to our podcast. I'm Coach César Valentim. With me is Coach Juan Moreno. Hi Juan, how are you?
I'm doing great. Happy to be here. Good to see you again.
Yeah, we see each other on competitions. Now we're seeing it on a podcast. For those who are listening and don't know who you are, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Like you mentioned, my name is Juan Miguel Moreno. I'm based here in the United States in Miami, Florida. I've been involved in martial arts since 1979 when I first began. And my specialty obviously is Taekwondo. You know, I love all martial arts. I've been able to practice a little bit of different martial arts, but obviously Taekwondo has been my mainstream focus for many, many years. I was lucky enough to go to the Olympic Games 3 times as an athlete. My first time I was at 17 years old. That was in Seoul, Korea, 92, Barcelona, and 2000 in Sydney, Australia. That was as an athlete. 2 medals. At the time, not so happy with, but now very proud of, because I know any medal at the Olympic Games is a great accomplishment. So very proud of that. And then I've coached since 2008 at the Olympic Games, 2008, 2012, 2016, 2020. Currently, I'm with the Brazil national team. I worked as a consultant with them for the last 3 years. And then in November, I signed a contract to work through the next Olympic Games in Paris. So it's a big challenge, but also a great opportunity.
Well, one of your big announcements of the year was your appointment as a head coach for Brazil. You do have been involved, as you mentioned, with them for quite a while as a consultant. Can you tell us what are the changes and the big plans for the Taekwondo powerhouse at Brazil?
You know, I think first and foremost, it's leadership. I do a lot of, people always use the term motivational speaking. I don't like that term. I like leadership speaking. And one of the great things right now with the Brazil Federation is I think their leadership. The president, Junior Marcial, was a former Olympic team coach, and he's moved up the ranks in the political world and became president last term and just got reelected. And of course, you know, everybody has their own challenges and difficulties, but I think his leadership style was important for the Brazil Federation. It's a huge country, as you know. It has a very rich tradition of individual success within the country, meaning there's pockets of successful athletes or successful coaches. But I think as a program, as a system, they could do better. And I think that's what he wants. His administration, he's had Natalia work with him as a technical director. She's since moved on to the Olympic Committee, but he's put in place certain people like myself that are kind of forward-thinking people that are looking at it as a program versus a kind of an individual athlete or individual coach success model. And that's hard to do with a big country. It's hard to do with a country that's been, I'll use the word dysfunctional for many years. And I don't mean that in a negative standpoint, but when you look at where they're at right now, that's been the biggest challenge. How do we come together? How do we work together for the benefit of all Brazilians, not just who's there right now? And that's a challenge for me, but we're working. We're taking steps to make that, you know, a possibility.
Dysfunctional is a nice way of putting it. Taekwondo had a few decades with a very traditional administration. In the last decades, a little over a decade, they moved into a national members, Brazilians being in charge. That's when Junior Marcel showed up as a national trainer. As you know, I was involved with them many years. You were there as a consultant and trying to get him some stuff done in the previous administrations. And since Natalia came on board as a technical director and now followed by Enrique, they have some changes. But as you mentioned, it's a big country with individual talent, some nucleus here and there where the athletes are focused and they have high performance training. But there is not a real national training program until now, is there?
No, and still, you're right. We don't have a centralized training system, as you know, and that is one of the biggest problems. We do just recently, we have a facility at the Olympic Center in Rio, and it's a place that's dedicated just for Taekwondo. So we're starting to try to have camps, selective camps, where we bring people in. We can work with them and let them go home. I think our goal would definitely be to have a full-time resident program, maybe not with the national team just yet, but with developmental athletes. And again, it's a challenge. I mean, there's budgetary, challenges. There's getting the right coach and the right fit challenge, and then getting people to understand the benefit of being there. Listen, ultimately, I mean, we can debate, one way or the other, if having a centralized training with the national team all the time, full time, is the best, or are we better served working with individual coaches, pockets, bringing them together periodically and working with them. I mean, I think probably for Brazil, it's a hybrid. I really do. And, you can look around at some world powers and they have centralized training and they do well. But you look at, there are some new models with some individualized training applications and they're being successful as well. So we're going to see what we can do in Brazil. I personally would like to have a little bit more of a concentrated effort right now, just because I think that from there you can expand to maybe some individual pocket trainings.
I know the Maria Lenk Water Park Center in Brazil was made for a temporary training facility, not a residency program. Do you see yourself moving into Maria Lenk's water park and actually having a small resident team?
Well, I think that's exactly where it is right now, which what I was mentioning in Rio is at the Maria Lenk. And that we have a dedicated area there. They've given us that. We looked at having a coach. We looked at having a domestic coach or an international coach go there and use it as not as the high residents or the national team athletes, but maybe a step below, maybe the under 20, maybe some juniors, and having a resident program. And again, building from there with the hope of some of those athletes kind of pushing some of our top athletes and making that center relevant.
I guess in Brazil it's a problem with the pipeline, since you do have so many sources where the athletes come as a cadets and juniors, and then they find difficulty to integrate the national team as a seniors. Some of the seniors being there for many years without actually any opposition in the country with 200 million inhabitants. You see that that kind of academy project where you would have the platform for the pipeline to actually jump into the big league, something that should be managed by a national or something that should be managed actually by someone like you?
It's a great question. I mean, I think if it's from a preference standpoint, somebody domestically would be the best person. If that person is qualified, if that person understands how to do some of these projects that we're talking about. Unfortunately, something that I noticed recently, I just got back from the Grand Slam and I was able to watch a number of days of competition, the cadets, the juniors, the seniors. And I noticed that there was a very good high quality of a certain amount of coaches, and then the drop off was huge. There just seemed like to be a big disconnect in some of those coaches. So, for example, on the senior national team, 14 out of 16 of the athletes came from 3 programs in Brazil. If you want to look at the positive, you can say, wow, these programs must be out of control good. Or you can look at the flip side. For me, as a big picture guy going, wow, that shouldn't happen. 3 coaches, 3 programs shouldn't dominate the whole country. There's a big disconnect. There's a big drop off. So, to answer your question, unless it was one of those coaches working there, we probably wouldn't have a domestic coach that could serve the purpose that we need. So we might have to look for somebody on the outside that could fill that role for us. It's very complicated, as you know. It's very complex. I mean, I think the person has to be the right person. The person has to understand the people, understand the temperament, understand the landscape, understand the economic standpoint where people come from. There's just a lot of variables that are unique to Brazil. different than if I went to Germany, or different than if you went to Belgium, or different if you went to Austria, where I would say how do I use the word? The style, the temperament of people is not such a huge variety, right? It's a little bit more mainstream. But in a country like Brazil, as you know better than even me, from A to Z is huge. There's a huge difference of people in education and culture and economic resources, just a lot of different things that you have to take into consideration to be a coach in the Brazil atmosphere.
Well, for those who are listening and don't know about it, the Grand Slam is what the Brazilian Federation calls the national team trials. It's an event that qualifies the players that will compete the rest of the year in the national team. As you mentioned, there are 3 centers that bring 14 out of the 16 weight divisions in seniors. These centers exist, in my opinion, because there was no central structure before, and the local clubs started to create their own performance centers, their own academies. And of course, the players that were isolated, and if they were probably in the region or even the city where they live, the only player in that weight division that have some kind of results, they would look into moving to these centers for financial support, logistics, training partners, better coaching systems, traveling possibilities, and of course, a whole bunch of other reasons that will motivate the players to search this or that coach. But now that these centers exist, it might even be counterproductive for them, or even a threat for their subsistence if the National Federation starts to replace them. So I do understand that having a full-time program is probably not advantageous for the institution that already has years of time and money and experience. So I find it quite interesting that you want to focus on the earlier development phases.
So actually, that's a good point, because I can see how other people would resist having this program, right? Because it affects their business. It affects their reputation, because maybe some athletes would move to this facility versus going with them. So I understand the push and pull, but my job is to not be emotionally connected. My job is to look at it from a big picture and try to help what's good for all of Brazil, not what's good for you or the individual athlete, but what's good for all of Brazil. And I think that's what the president, Junior Marcial, brought me in, because he knew that I wasn't emotionally connected to individual athletes or individual programs, that I could look at this and just kind of speak very plainly, very bluntly, and criticize or give credit when things are going well or not well. So, it is a little bit of a long-term process. And one of the things that is a challenge for me specifically is I know that the federation is being looked at by the Olympic Committee, and we're being judged at the highest level. But in order to change the mindset in the system, I have to go through probably the lowest level, the cadet and the junior. So that's going to take some time. You're not going to bear fruit in 3 years. I mean, realistically, I know there's some, in other countries, there's some, look at Spain with their young lady, look at Uzbekistan with their young man, look at Tunisia with their young man at this last Olympic Games. But those are, I'm going to say those are isolated scenarios. That's not a big result of the program. It was special, unique individuals. So again, my challenge will be to produce at the top, but develop from the bottom. So, but again, it's a challenge, and I'm super excited to take on that challenge. I have another big challenge, the language. I'm doing my little, Portuguese classes, a couple times a day to try to pick up some words here and there and little phrases here and there. And although some speak English, not all of them speak English. So it's another challenge, that we'll have to work through.
I can relate to that, being a Portuguese in Brazil. Okay, it's time for a little break to our sponsors, and I'll be right back. This podcast is supported by Hawken Dynamics. Hawken Dynamics believes that technology is most useful when it stays out of your way. That's why Hawken developed the world's first wireless force plate system with extreme usability. It is the quickest, easiest to use, and most robust solution on the market. It is trusted by all sports organizations large and small, as well as tactical, military, and rehabilitation environments around the globe. It's force testing in the palm of your hand. Here at Taekwondo Center, we use Hawken Dynamics to test and monitor our team. The cloud-based platform allows us to access data and publish a variety of reports on the go.
My favorites are trend reports and of course weight reports, where I can monitor different metrics to view progress and identify performance indicators, or to compare weights to a baseline data range. I use it on a daily basis to identify readiness. A simple jumping test takes me less than a minute to assess the entire team. Having my own Hawken Dynamics force plates allows me to test reactive strengths, maximum strengths, rate of force development, asymmetry, and so much more. The real-time feedback on the app is useful not only for testing, but as a training tool, making it more accurate and at the same time more engaging for the athletes. If you are interested in learning more about Hawken Dynamics or getting your own, the team can be reached at info@hawkendynamics.com or on Instagram or Twitter @HawkenDynamics. When talking about Taekwondo training, we need to talk about Athlete Analyzer. Athlete Analyzer is the first Taekwondo-specific athlete monitoring system. It is used by both national teams, regional squads and small clubs to maximize performance, prevent injuries and communicate with both athletes and trainer teams. Athlete Analyzer is a cloud-based system with a friendly smartphone app. You can plan and monitor every aspect of your training, even when you are not in the gym with your team. The easy-to-use video analysis tool is not like anything you've seen. It helps you understand your athletes and even their opponents, making this app the only tool you need to manage your team. Before I used Athlete Analyzer, I spent an absurd amount of time in front of the computer, creating spreadsheets and using half a dozen software solutions. I have athletes in my center, but also abroad, and with Athlete Analyzer, it's much easier to communicate, plan, and monitor their development. Now that I have extra time, I can focus on what matters, training my athletes, and it still leaves me some room to do other stuff, like this Taekwondo podcast. Athlete Analyzer offers you a 2 weeks free trial. Visit them at athleteanalyzer.com to sign up, or click on the link in the episode's description. To get the most of your free trial, I recommend you first book a free personal demonstration with Nicholas. It will give you a great insight of what Athlete Analyzer has to offer you and your team. It is well worth the time.
You're listening to the Taekwondo Podcast. Now back to your hosts, Coach César Valentim and Peter Nessler.
Okay, welcome back. We've been here talking with Coach Juan Moreno about his new development programs in Brazil. Talking about the development in the sport, the rules are changing, making the game slightly different to the second semester. What are your thoughts about these new changes?
Yeah, I mean, if there's one thing I do not like about our sport is the constant change in rules. You know, I do a lot of presentations, and I always tell people, when, not if, when the rules change. And, you know, I think that's one of the, I don't have a problem saying the bad and negative and disappointing and embarrassing part of our sport. Because if you look at football, baseball, basketball, hockey, I mean, the rules are, I mean, if you watched a game a long time ago, you kind of understand the game still. I mean, you could say the speed is different. You could say the height is different, but our sport keeps changing and it makes it difficult for trainers, for athletes, for programs to have any kind of consistency. You know, I mean, right now everyone's scrambling. What's the next new drill? What do we do with our hands now? You know, so I think the intentions are good. I know the intentions are good. The interpretation and the implementation of these new rules, these changes are going to be, again, I don't want to be a negative guy. I'm going to say challenging. So when I look at the rules, it seems like it's for activity. It's to avoid close range fighting and this kind of ability to trick the system with kicks and manipulations of the legs. And it seems like it wants the game is going to look like it could be a little bit further apart, a little bit more direct striking, a little bit cleaner, so to speak. And again, I'm not saying that's better or worse, but that's my impression. If you think about it, they don't want you to clinch, you know, so to speak. They don't want you to attack in the clinch. So that's going to make everything kind of spread out a little bit more. You can only move a certain amount of steps back. They're only going to give you 4 deductions if you're fighting the 2 out of 3 rounds system. So it looks like you're going to have to be much more active. Your endurance is going to have to be better. Your kick output is going to have to be better. Your ring management is going to have to be better. I think it's going to change the style of athlete that we have. You know, I don't think the static standing there, you know, canceling or getting in the way is going to be as productive or effective. And if they call the the leg block or the interference of kicking with the other, from the defensive person to the letter of the law, that's going to change a lot, a lot.
I think that rule already existed. It was a matter of interpretation, and who's in charge of the competition as a referee chairman, in this case, a referee woman, chairwoman. But as you mentioned, in football, you look at soccer, they had the same goals, more or less, even maybe instead of iron, they have aluminium, but it's still the same goals, the same distance. In our case, in 2012, at the Olympics, we had a different game. We had the electronic vests, and then later on the electronic helmets. Especially now with the referees having too little to do, the punches became even more important, to a point that it's in private. I usually discuss if should we even have punches or not, if they're so subjective. So it is actually a new game. The moment we introduced electronic sensors, we moved into a different sport. I can compare it for fencing. Fencing, before it became electronic and being just touching with the sensors on the protectors of the opponents, it used to be fought in a total different field. It used to be fought in a circle, not in a line, because they introduced the cables to connect the sensors. They needed these electric cables. They had no Bluetooth technology back then. It moved the sport from fighting like gladiators in a circle to touching each other with the tip of the florin. So all of this situation came into Taekwondo, and we're trying to change it by changing the rules instead of changing the technology. So I think that's something that we're going to see coming for a long time, is changing, and currently adaptation to the rules to limit the creativity of the players instead of actually improving on the technology.
I agree with you. I listen, and that's, going back to the problem, I think the technology is good. I know me and you have talked many times in different chats, old school, new school, whatever. Listen, I love them both. I fought in that era. I fought in this era. I've coached in both eras. And I'm a progressive person. I like moving forward. People can say whatever they want, but listen, the athletes nowadays, they're better. I'll say it. No one wants to hear it. They're better. Why are they better? They lift weights better. They have better nutrition. They have better psychology. They have better tactics. They have videos like this that you can get on the dime. And in my days, the best athletes, you might get a VHS tape of them if you were lucky. I was literally telling my wife yesterday, I picked up a thing of juice, and I said, when I used to lose weight, this is all I had was a juice. And I didn't know how to eat. I didn't know how to hydrate. I didn't know how to do any of that stuff. The athletes are better prepared nowadays. The rules and the system have changed the way they fight. So I'm all for that. But if we want to get to the root of this problem, we have to fix the technology. And it's going to cost money. I get it. But we have to fix that, because you're trying to make the athletes conform to the technology. It shouldn't be that way. The technology should conform to the athletes. Let us train and develop, and athletically, intellectually, strategically. Why should we have to change for the rules? Why should we have to change? The system works like this and we kick like that. That doesn't seem right. Like you said, you kick the ball in the same goal. You shoot the ball in the same goal. The athletes have developed their footwork and their hand dribbling skills, or their kicking skills to make the ball curve and stuff like that. But they've developed that because they want to get better, not because, we shrunk the basket. We tilted the goal at a little bit of an angle, to make it more difficult to score. That shouldn't be the case.
Going through the rules deserves not a podcast, but an entire scientific seminar, probably a coach general assembly. And I'm pretty sure that we're going to spend many, many more hours in competitions between coaches in the end of the day talking about this, talking about the technology. That's our life offline. And that's actually one of the things we like to discuss. It's, of course, our sport. It's something that is very common in Taekwondo trainers. We only talk about Taekwondo. But talking about Taekwondo, and this is probably a question that many of our listeners have, what is the philosophy behind your peak performance program, and what lessons have you learned from these decades of experience?
I'm proud, however you want to say it, arrogant or proud, but I'm very proud of what we've been able to do in peak performance. And peak performance has been around since, I literally, when I stopped competing in 2001 is when I started the Peak Performance. And, when I started it out very organically, just club, just my own little group of people here in Miami, very Miami-based athletes. And it grew into something. It grew into something domestically where we've been able to expand with clubs and teams and coaches, a few in. And of course, we probably have some recognition worldwide now from some of the successes that we've had. But really, it was a grassroots model. It was a model for development to try to get to the top of the mountain, so to speak, to get to the Olympic Games. And I say that we've been doing this for 20 years because we just talked about a short evolution of the sport. Now, quadruple that from 20 years. So I feel like what we've been able to do is to change with the times consistently. Is it easy? No. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. Do I have all the answers? Absolutely not. But I'm proud that I've been able to change my mentality for the benefit of the athletes. And even more proud to take that down to coaches, where now some of the coaches that I've worked with are literally at my level. Some of them are even having more success, from time to time. And I think that's a sign of a good program. If the boss is always the boss and no one's able to kind of catch them or surpass them, I don't think that's a successful model. Our model should always be to try to make people better than us. And I haven't been afraid to do that. And, that's been one of the successes of Peak Performance. So much so that people want to come and work with us now. Before we were always searching out stuff. Now we're getting international teams, international coaches that want to come and say, what are you guys doing? Like, how have you been able to do that so long?
That's actually the question I should have probably asked you before, because since I know you for, 20 years, I've known your programs, I've known all this, but for the listeners out there, what is exactly the Peak Performance? What is Peak Performance today, and what kind of programs you develop?
So, Peak Performance is a sport Taekwondo-based program, different than maybe some other places in the world. In the United States, Taekwondo is a martial art business. It's a business first and foremost. It's a self-development business. And of course, it produces some athletes. But the focus, for sure, is not to develop an athlete. It's to develop a business model. Peak Performance, that's based here in Miami, started out as only a sport development program. So what does that mean? I don't have beginners. I don't have white belts or yellow belts. I don't teach anybody from the beginning. I'm like a professional sport team where a soccer player comes and then they get developed by Manchester United. They get developed by Real Madrid. They get developed by Barcelona. That's the kind of process and mindset that we started with Peak Performance here in Miami. So people came to us as black belts or as athletes that wanted to achieve something else. Through that model, we started to branch out domestically. Right now, we have 14 programs around the country that are under our Peak Performance brand, which means I work with the coaches, develop the coaches. That local coach works with the local team. And periodically, 3 to 4 times a year, I visit those individual clubs, work with the coaches, work with the athletes, so that we're all in the same training program, same schedule. In 2022, we're a little bit more of an international type of program now. I have, like I told you, I obviously right now I work with the Brazilian Federation, but in the past I worked with the Mexican, I worked with the Guatemalan, worked with the Chileans, worked with the Costa Ricans. Obviously a little bit more dominant over here. I have a good relationship with a coach in Denmark. I had a couple in Sweden and Canada as well. But for the most part, we're based here in the Pan American region, but we're always looking to expand and get over to other places. One of the best compliments I ever had was I had a gentleman come to my gym and he heard about Peak Performance. He's seen Peak Performance. And he came in and he looked around and he's like, after about 2 or 3 days, he's like, I can't believe how much you have done with how little you have. And I first, some people might kind of take that as a negative thing, but I was like I'm proud that, we don't have government funding. We don't have sports scientists that are at our beck and call. Everything that we do, we have to kind of put together by ourselves. That's the American way. You know what I'm saying? That's how things build up. And Taekwondo is not a huge sport in America. as compared to baseball, basketball, football, tennis, hockey. So, we don't have people beating down our doors to give us resources. We have to do everything on our own. So, we're kind of proud of that. And, we're trying to, that's the competition that we have. Like, for example, in Europe, that it's very professional in sport and in amateur sport. And the resources that sometimes you guys have is much greater than what we have. So we have to work a little bit differently to achieve the success that we have.
Success is always a part of the brand Juan Moreno. Besides success, what are your vision for the next Olympic cycle, both in terms of peak performance and as a coach?
I when I became the head coach of Brazil, I don't do any more domestic coaching. When I talk about coaching, like me sitting in the ring and stuff like that, do I do training camps and things like that? Of course. I mean, that's my business. But, my focus right now is 100% on Brazil. We're short term, we have the Pan American Championships coming up and the World Championships. I'd like to do very well in those. Long term for Brazil, we would love to get a medal. We need to get a medal at the Olympic Games. That's my personal mission. I'm not sure if I would stay longer in Brazil or if I'll move on to something else. But really, I think that it's time for Juan Moreno to move up the ladder in the world of Taekwondo. I mean, I don't think a person should always stay as a coach. I think they should move up to administration, move up to leadership. I mean, again, there's time for new coaches, new energy, new vision, just a new, we use the term in America, that there's new blood. And I think that the Peak Performance Program has produced a lot of good athletes and some good coaches. And I think it's time for me to still lead and still guide, but not necessarily be the day-to-day person. And I think that's a smart evolution as a human being, to try to stay at one thing forever. I just don't think that's a positive thing. And I try to look at my other mentors. When I say mentors, they don't know they're my mentors, but other people in sport that are really successful, and see how they develop and see how they move on to the next stage of their life. I'm going to be a Taekwondo person. I love Taekwondo, and I don't see myself ever getting out of it, but I definitely need to play a different role. And I don't know if that's with the WT. I don't know if that's with another World Federation. I don't know if that's even me stepping back and saying, what, I would like to take Peak Performance, the brand and the model, even a higher level, but more from an administrative part. I mean, one of my favorite men in the world is Moreno Fargas. I mean, he was a successful coach. He moved into a business where he was put people in place, and he's still doing it. I mean, he still has, he's quiet about it, but he still has a camp. He still has a facility, and he has a great thing that he's done with his life. And I think that's a great evolution as a man and as a Taekwondo person. So yeah, I look at, some of those kind of things. I should have mentioned it. My wife, was a former, Mexican national athlete, former Mexican world medalist, national team coach. She's here with me in Miami. I have 4 daughters. My oldest just turned 21, is looking to go to law school. My youngest is 8. So, I have I'd like to have a lot of time with them, because as you know, we spend a lot of time on the road and a lot of time traveling, and it's to provide a life for them. But I'd also like to spend some time with them as well, enjoy their journeys and their successes. I mean, as a family person, I would like to do that.
Thank you, Juan. I'm sure I'll see you many times before you retire your coaching suit. It was a pleasure being here with you and with everyone who is listening out there. This was the Taekwondo Podcast. If you haven't already, listen to our other episodes. They are available online wherever you listen to your podcasts. We are releasing new episodes every Tuesday. Stay tuned, subscribe to our podcast, leave us a positive review, and share it with your friends. See you next time.
This podcast is sponsored by First Beat Sports. First Beat Sports combines the most comprehensive analytics in team sports with a customizable interface to support real-time monitoring, recovery monitoring, performance management, and much more. The result? Data-driven decisions that support your athletes and team training, recovery, and performance goals. First Beat Sports is trusted by professionals. Over 23,000 athletes representing over 1,000 teams around the world rely on the solution to train and plan with confidence on a team and individual level using HRV-based insights. For more information, please visit our website, firstbeat.com/sports.
You've been listening to the Taekwondo Podcast, keeping the fans, coaches, and high-performance athletes up to date with the latest news and trends on Olympic Taekwondo. Your host, Coach César Valentim, has almost 20 years of experience with high-performance Taekwondo and has worked all around the world as a Taekwondo trainer. Peter Nessler has been teaching Taekwondo for more than 20 years, and he's currently one of the top referees in Europe. We hope you enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review, and we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, find us on Instagram at Taekwondo Podcast, on Facebook at Taekwondo Cast, and the website taekwondopodcast.com. See you next time.